Ron Dermer, Israel's Minister of Strategic Affairs. Mr. Dermer, good to have you on this morning. Let's start at the beginning and go to...
Good to be with you, Victor, and happy Easter.
Thank you.
Happy Easter to you and all your Christian viewers. Happy Passover to the Jewish viewers, and Ramadan Kareem to all your Muslim viewers. And fortunately, today in Jerusalem, all three faiths were able to practice and worship freely without incident.
Thank you very much for that, and happy Passover to you. Let me start with Wednesday and the Israeli police raids on the Al-Aqsa Mosque. There was, as Salma mentioned, this warning from the Jordanian foreign minister who says if there is another raid there, as there were people there overnight, that happened, they left peacefully, there would be catastrophic consequences. Why was there an Israeli action there, a police action anyway? The Jordanians are the custodians of this. That's a violation of status quo.
No, it's not a violation of the status quo. Israel is responsible for security on that site, and it's important for your viewers to understand that for about 2 weeks before, we had tens of thousands of Muslims who prayed there without incident. What happened on the night where Israeli police were forced to go in was you had about 300 young men who were masked and who armed themselves with rocks, with incendiary explosives, and with weapons. And what they were trying to do the next morning as non-Jews and Jews were going to go and visit the Temple Mount, they were planning to attack them and to actually have Muslim worshipers, it could have been thousands of them on the Temple Mount, they could have been innocent bystanders in this attack. And so the Israeli police decided to go in and to make sure that they could remove those armed, they weren't praying in Al-Aqsa Mosque. They were there in order to incite and to perpetrate violent attacks. And so our police went in there and removed those people and then enabled the next day for Muslims to go to that site and to pray peacefully. Unfortunately, this was taken by a lot of people to mean that Israel simply just stormed and raided the mosque without incident. Those of you who have seen the videos, you may have noticed that there were fireworks that were launched inside the mosque. That was not done by the Israeli police. That was done by Muslim worshipers. Now, what peaceful worshipers would actually use fireworks and desecrate the mosque? That's unfortunately what happened. I think it was a desecration to Muslims throughout the world, but Israel was not responsible for it. Those violent young men who came in, who were trying to perpetrate these attacks, these terror attacks against innocent civilians, they were responsible for it, and the police had to go in. And they did it, by the way, without killing anybody, without sending anyone to the hospital. And unfortunately, this was used as a provocation to stir up violence in Gaza, in Lebanon, in Syria, and elsewhere. Well, and that's unfortunate. And I think the media should make sure that it's presenting the full picture of what happened, where we're trying to defend lives, not just Jewish lives, Muslim lives, and Christian lives, in a very, very combustible place.
Mr. Dermer, what's your response to the Jordanian foreign minister who says that if Israeli police go back into that mosque for another action, that there will be catastrophic consequences?
Well, what we can't do as Israel, who is responsible for security on the site, we cannot allow innocent civilians to be killed by violent terrorists who would barricade themselves into the Al-Aqsa Mosque. That is not a policy that we would be able to adopt. We do not want to go in there. It is the last thing. Unfortunately, today, Victor, we didn't have to go in because the people who went in there did not go there, according to our intelligence, to perpetrate violence, and so therefore there was no incidents. It's very rare when Israeli police have to go into the Al-Aqsa compound. I think it's happened 3 times in the last half dozen years. It is the last thing we want to do, but we also have a responsibility to protect our civilians, to protect Muslim worshipers, to protect Jews and non-Jews who go to the Temple Mount, which is part of the status quo. We cannot allow those violent young men who are masked and who are armed to perpetrate those attacks, because then you'll have a situation that will be infinitely worse than the pictures that you saw on Wednesday.
Let me ask you about the condemnation from Bahrain, from the UAE, who say that what happened there, you say it was protecting Jews and non-Jews. They condemned it. Are you risking the Abraham Accords and what was accomplished over the last several years with some of your neighbors?
No, I don't think so. I think they know the truth. We're in close contact with them. I think they understand it. But when people get whipped up in a frenzy, when they're shown 15 seconds of a clip instead of the whole story, a lot of people jump to conclusions. I think it's a mistake. And I think here it's very important for people to present the full picture and actually to put the pressure on Jordan, on the Waqf, the religious authorities who control the Al-Aqsa compound, to make sure they do not allow violent people to enter it, which can endanger Muslims, Jews, Christians, and everyone else who wants to come to this very, very sensitive area. But I have no doubt that our relations with our peace partners are strong, and they're going to continue to get stronger in the future.
Let me ask you about these protests that happened again over the weekend to these judicial reforms. Does the Prime Minister still support the full slate, these four pieces of legislation, these proposals, in whole? I mean, he said that there should be a pause for dialogue, or does he believe that this is the time for some compromise?
Well, he definitely believes that this is a time for compromise, and that's why he suspended the legislation. The president of Israel is now bringing the parties together in the hope that we can forge that compromise, and that's what we'd like to see happen. Look, people in Israel are seriously divided over this issue. There are people who think that if you don't have judicial reform, it endangers Israel's democracy. There are people who think if you do have judicial reform, it endangers Israel's democracy. I think it's important to get everyone in the room together and to try to forge a compromise. That's exactly what the Prime Minister wants to do. And I think that the problem, Victor, is that there may be people outside of Israel who think that because of this division, Israel is not going to stand united and defend itself against their aggression. They are wrong. They are dead wrong. Israel will stand united, and we will push back against anyone who's trying to harm our citizens, whether it comes from Gaza, whether it comes from Lebanon, whether it comes from Syria. And there's an invisible hand behind all of this, which is important to understand, your viewers to understand, and that is Iran, which is trying to stir the pot against Israel. It's trying to put a noose around Israel's neck in Syria, Lebanon, Gaza, Yemen.
Mr. Dermer, let me interrupt for a second.
It's a very, very dangerous actor in the region, and I was pleased.
These proposals didn't come from Iran. These proposals came from the Likud party. They came from and were proposed and supported.
I'm not talking about the proposals.
But that's what my question is about. My question is about if those proposals, if the Prime Minister still believes and supports them in full, you say it's a time for compromise to get everybody in a room. Why didn't that happen before there were tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people protesting for days?
Well, we had an election in Israel several months ago, as you know. There's a mandate to push forward with judicial reform. There's obviously people in Israel who were opposed to that reform. And the Prime Minister made a decision, which rarely happens in democratic countries, where elected leaders have a mandate to do what their voters want them to do. At the precipice of actually passing this legislation, he decided to suspend it. And he decided to give a chance to have a compromise and to have a discussion. I think that Israel's internal divisions have been misinterpreted. This is why I talked about Iran. Misinterpreted by our enemies, and maybe they think this is a time to attack Israel. Believe me, Israel will stand united and will defend itself against that aggression. I have no doubt that we will stand together and confront anyone who tries to endanger our country and endanger our civilians.
You suggested that the country is standing together, that the state of Israel is standing together, but these pictures show that there is a lot of division, especially on these proposals. I want to ask you about the influence of President Biden.
The picture shows that there's protests because Israel is a democracy.
Yes.
There were pictures in Iran a few months ago when you saw protests and the government was killing the protesters. That's the difference between a democratic state and a non-democratic state. All it means is that Israel is a vibrant, healthy democracy. We were a democracy. We are a democracy. And whether these reforms pass or don't pass, whatever compromise we reach, Israel will continue to be a democracy.
Sure. We're not comparing in this conversation Israel and Iran. My context here is about, you say that this is showing that Israel will stand united, but the pictures, and let's put them back up, so that we see just over the last 24 hours, the thousands of people who were out protesting this proposal. You say this shows unity. These are people who are saying they do not want the proposal that has been put forth. You say there's a time for compromise. And my question is, what influence does the U.S. have over this? President Biden said that there is no near-term plan to invite Prime Minister Netanyahu to the White House. He says that any judicial changes should have broad public support. Does this proposal, from your opinion, former ambassador to the U.S., weaken the Israeli relationship with the United States?
No, I don't think it does. And what I said, Victor, is not that those pictures show unity. It shows freedom. It shows that we're a free society and people have different views about different issues. You have protests in the United States all the time from people on different sides of the aisle who are for or against this particular policy. There's no question that the U.S. Relationship with Israel is rock solid. It will continue to be rock solid under President Biden. I have no doubt about that. I was very pleased to see that the White House put out a strong statement backing Israel's right to defend itself, as did other allies in Europe. And I saw also just in the last 24 hours that the United States has pulled